Okay, everyone, I think we'll make a start there. If I can just see in the chat if anyone can hear me, just say a quick yes, and then we'll make a start as soon as I'm aware that I can be heard. I've got my iPad in the background here. I'm just checking it on there as well. It should come up any second now. Bit of a delay. Should come up any second now. Okay, I can see it on my iPad now. Right, sorry about that, folks. I've got my computer here, then I've got an iPad in the background just to check what I'm seeing. And there's about a 20-second delay. Anyway, let's make a start then. Let's switch up. Let's do a bit of biology. We get the exam tomorrow morning. I think it's tomorrow morning. And it's biology paper 2. Now, this is a kind of an odd paper. Bit of feedback there. Thank you, Amelia. This is a bit of an odd paper. There's a lot of knowledge that you have to cover. There's not a lot of application. The application side might be some of the required practicals, but I think it's really only the ones in the ecology section at the end, the quadrats. So what I'm going to do is, well, what I have done actually, is I've done a little run through ChatGPT and a couple of the AI models to see what might come up in the paper, biology paper 2, and it's come up with some suggestions. So maybe we should go with that. Now, we also can't predict what will be in the paper tomorrow. We can kind of have a guess of what might come up. Okay, so I think that might be the best place to start. Let me get some bits. I've got some paper here. I'm just going to shuffle through them and get the right things coming up. Okay. So I think, obviously we need to start with B5. And B5 is homeostasis. And there's a few things that are coming up on the AI models that say this may come up for homeostasis. So I want to run through a couple of those. I've got the right printouts here. Yes, I do. Okay, and one of the things that comes up is the central nervous system. And so before we do that, let's just have a little chat. There's a couple of things about homeostasis I want to make sure that we know. And first of all is the actual definition for homeostasis. And it is, I'm just going to put down a couple of little buzzwords here, not the full description, but a couple of things that you should mention when it comes to homeostasis. And essentially it is small changes in response to external stimuli or external changes and internal changes in the body, and it's to maintain some kind of a stable environment or a stable internal environment. Maintain stable body conditions. And we're looking at things like water, pH, temperature, blood glucose. So the body's always changing, is always responding to changes in its external environment, so things that happen to you from the outside, and also things that happen inside. Your body's always going to go through these changes to maintain the same stable level. For example, your body needs to have a constant level of glucose in it to be alive. You need to do respiration. So if that glucose levels increases or decreases, then your body has to respond, and that's homeostasis. It's small changes to maintain this stable body environment or stable body conditions. I didn't put down the word there, just stable body, and things like these. Okay, so that's what you have to look at, and also how it does that. There's a key phrase which we reckon might come up tomorrow, and that phrase is negative feedback. And I want to just, again, this is something that is quite commonly misunderstood. just what is negative feedback. And I've got my way of doing it. I did an electronics degree at university a long time ago now, and negative feedback is part of a control system for machines, for computer-aided systems. But in the body, let's think about it in the following way. I want to imagine this dotted line is your normal levels. That's what we want. We always want the body to have normal levels. Like this could be water, pH, temperature, blood glucose. We want that to be all the time. But if things happen, then that level might increase. Now, the minute it increases, we want to bring it down. So if this goes up, we need to do something to bring it down. So we bring it down, and then it goes too low. So we're going lower than the normal. So the body says, no, do something to make it increase. And it does that. And you're always kind of doing that. If you go too high, your body says, do the opposite. So if you go up, the body says, go down. If you go down, your body says, go up. And so you're always doing the opposite or the negative of what's happening. So again, I'll say that again. For example, if your blood glucose increases, then that goes up. The body says, no, let's do the following thing to bring that down, which is the opposite of what's happening. Okay, so you never stay on this line. You're always kind of going up and down, up and down. You're always trying to maintain this level. So the body's never on that line. It's always kind of going either side of it. And that's homeostasis. It's negative feedback. So that phrase, you got to know what it is. Okay, so negative feedback is the body says the following thing is happening, do the opposite or do the negative of it. Okay, if it's going up, do the opposite, which is down, the negative. Okay, so that's negative feedback in the body. You've got to know that. I'm sure will come up tomorrow. Okay, so that's one thing that will come up. The other thing is the both control centers. Okay, so there are two control centers there are two main control centers in the body. There is the nervous system, and then there is the endocrine system. And there's a nice way. Now, I'm going to steal this from Cognito. I strongly recommend that, and I'll put these in the description link at the end of this, that you look up a couple of Cognito videos. These are just some screen grabs. Again, shouldn't be doing it, but I'm giving credit to Cognito because they're good videos. So there are this homeostatic response, which is negative feedback, does so by receiving signals, coordinating those signals, and doing something that affects or does something to those signals. And we have the two systems. We've got the nervous system and the endocrine system. Let me just get my autofocus here a little bit better. Now, a couple of things that you have to know. The nervous system is very fast and it's precise, and it does so through electrical impulses through nerves. And these nerves have another name, also called neurons. And there are three types. Okay, there are sensory, there are relay, and there are motor neurons. Okay, so you've got to know those. I'm just going to try and focus this again. Do apologize. Now, a couple of things I have to know about that is so these electrical impulses through nerves, and they are quick responses. They're also short lasting. They're kind of immediate or almost immediate, and they last a short time. The endocrine system involves hormones. They can be precise, but they're kind of generic as well. And the signal isn't electrical. The signals are chemical hormones. Okay, so if these are electrical impulses, hormones are chemical. Okay, and they travel through the bloodstream. Now they're slower, and you're not talking ages, we're talking it's slower than the nervous system. They're longer lasting. They can last from seconds up to even years. And they're more generalized. They have a target. So hormones are produced, let me just go up here for a second. Hormones are produced in glands, and they target organs or other glands. We'll come more onto this. We'll do a couple of things with this later on. We're going to look at the menstrual cycle and the fertility hormones, but we're going to, and I'll also look at blood glucose levels. But it's all to do with the glands secrete hormones, but there's a nice word as well. Secrete. Glands secrete hormones into the bloodstream, and they target the specific organs. They might go into the whole of the bloodstream, but they have specific target organs or other glands that they will affect. So that's the two control systems in the body. Let's take a closer look at the nervous system, and we're going to have a look at this. Okay, so this here is the idea of how the nervous system works. Before we do that though, let's just clarify. The nervous system is this network of nerve cells, and there are two parts to the central nervous system. So we get the nervous system, which contains all the nerves, as well as the central nervous system. And the central nervous system contains two main organs. It contains the brain, and it contains the spinal cord. Now remember, in anatomy we spell cord with C-O-R-D. In music is obviously it's a C-H-O-R-D. So that's the central nervous system. The nervous system includes the central nervous system and all the other neurons throughout the entire body. Now, here's how it works basically. There's a stimulus. So you've got to know that there's a stimulus, and there's a receptor. Then there's a signal that travels along a sensory neuron. And we'll ignore this bit for the moment. Things that require thought or processing the brain will go from sensory neuron. There's a gap there, and then it goes to the relay neurons, which could be in the spinal cord of the brain, back to a motor neuron, which causes the muscle to move. Now, it could be not a muscle, it could be an organ. It could be something which does something in the body. Let's look at this one, for example, which is you're looking at the glass of water and you want to drink it. So for that to happen, you've got to see the glass, pick it up, you've got to process that signal, and then move your muscle in such a way that it goes up to your mouth. Another example could be if someone throws a ball in your direction, your eyes will get the stimulus of seeing the ball. Then that signal goes from sensory neuron in your eye to your brain, then your brain relay neurons to your motor neurons and your muscles, and you're always making these little adjustments to try and catch the ball. So this happens, this could be hundreds of times, if not thousands of times every second. So this is a very quick system which always sort of feeding back to itself. Let's have a closer look at this part here, which is a reflex arc. So this could be a response. Decision making requires conscious thought in the brain. Some things your body does which are autonomic, which means it doesn't involve the brain. You don't think about it, you just do it. But before we tackle that, let's just quickly establish these gaps. So these gaps here, I'm sure you have to know this for tomorrow, these are called synapses. And we'll discuss that shortly after we look at the reflex arc. Now, it is electrical along there. It is electrical along there. It's electrical along there. That's supposed to be a lightning bolt, by the way. And it is electrical along there. But in the synapse, it is chemical neurotransmitters. Neurotransmitters. So chemical neurotransmitters, and these could actually be chemicals which double up as hormones. In the brain, for example, you could have dopamine, serotonin. You could have these hormones which are also acting as neurotransmitters, but they jump across the gap. So basically, the signal comes in, and the electrical signal stops at the end, causes the chemicals to be released into the gap. They jump across, they get picked up on the other side by receptors on this nerve cell, and then that triggers the next response in the relay neuron. Once the chemicals are done the job, they will be reuptaken back into the end of this neuron, and they can be used again. Okay, we'll discuss shortly how you can interrupt that. But that's essentially what your central nervous system is. It's electrical neurons with chemical gaps called synapses. Here is what's called the reflex arc. Now, it's reckoned in a few AI models this will come up tomorrow. So again, there's nothing particularly difficult about it. It follows the same pattern of stimulus. So here's the key parts that you've got to know. There is, let me try and match the colours. So we've got pink and blue. So we've got the stimulus, which is your body detects that. You've then got this electrical signal, which travels along. So the stimulus causes a signal to be generated at the nerve endings here that travels along the neuron, and then it gets to the synapses, the chemicals, the neurotransmitters jump across the gap, and then you have the relay neuron. Now, it's noted that this is contained, in the spinal cord, not the brain. The reason being, to travel up to the brain and back would be too long a distance. This has to be the quick response to prevent the body saying, this could cause me injury, I want to do this as quick as possible. The stimulus and then the sensory neuron are part of that initial part. The relay neuron is in the spinal cord only, and then the signal is returned back down the motor neuron, and then to the effector. In this case, it's a muscle. So if you get hurt by a pointed or a sharp object, the signal travels along electrically, the sensory neuron jumps across the synapse chemically, the relay neuron in the spinal cord processes or basically transmits the signal to the motor neuron, which causes the muscle to contract, and then you can release your arm, you pull your arm away from the object. That's called the reflex arc. And I strongly recommend that you have that in your brain for tomorrow, because people reckon it's going to come up in the exam. So you're going to know about it. So let's explore, and more often than not, some of the questions that ask is about this little chemical gap. So let's quickly cover the synapse. So the way it's usually drawn is you have the end of one cell, so this electrical signal comes down here, and then there is another, let's call this the sensory neuron, and let's call this the relay neuron. And what happens is you've got little, I think they're called vesicles. So let's do one over here. So this is going to be a 1, 2, 3, kind of the step 1 down here. Step 2 will happen here. Step 3. So this doesn't happen at the same time. This is kind of that's step 1, step 2, step 3, and let's say there are these little chemicals in this vesicle. So the signal comes along here, and it causes these to be released. What happens is they will be released into the synapse. Remember, this is called the synaptic gap, or the synapse. So it comes in, these chemicals which are in there get released, they go across the gap, and on here you have these little receptor sites. They go, aha, I've got some signals coming in, send another signal down there. So, signal comes in, the chemicals get released across the synapse, triggering another electrical signal on the next relay neuron, or it could be relay to motor neuron, doesn't matter, it's a synaptic gap. Now, once the chemicals have done the job, there should be a reuptake back in here, so they should go back up and they can be used again. So this doesn't happen at the same time. I want to imagine this is kind of step 1, step 2, step 3. They're in there, they're released, they get reuptaken. Okay, and it can be used again. Now, when it comes to medication, when it comes to drugs, for example, painkillers, for example, could be a type of drug that you could use. You can cause these to be released in greater numbers. You can cause these to not be reuptaken. They could hang about in the gap, constantly firing more signals in the next neuron. You could stop them being released. So you could inhibit these. You could leave them there, causing lots of firings of the cells, and not be reuptaken. So that's a couple of different ways you could do it. If you want to have a painkiller, so you could have a chemical. I mean, by the way, I should just mention, these are just one example of many neurotransmitters. There could be ones for regular signals. There could be ones for pain. There could be ones for different emotions in the brain, for example. Say this one was a signal responding to pain. If you were to block that signal, you would have something, a drug, which stops or blocks these sites. So you're stopping the chemical getting onto these sites because you are deliberately blocking them, so they can't ever trigger another signal. That could be a painkiller. So you don't have to know those in too much detail, but you have to know this, what the neurotransmitters are. They are flood across the gaps, and then they're reuptaken, and drugs can interact with either one of those processes. Okay, let's now look at one specific system in the body, which is blood glucose. Okay, question by Freddie, good question. Does synapse just refer to the gap? Yes, so the synapse is the gap between the neurons. So the neurons, let's go back to that page. Yeah, so guys, again, that's what the chat's before. Thank you for asking. So the nervous system is the neurons, sensory, relay, motor neurons with the brain, spinal cord, and then the synapse, the gaps there. Okay, so the gap is between these. They don't touch. There's a separation, and that separation, that gap, is called the synapse. Okay, so the synapse is the gap. Okay, now let's have a look at negative feedback in action. And so I want to discuss a couple of different ways of this. I want to discuss blood glucose, and then I want to discuss the fertility. And then we'll go on to look at B6, evolution and genetics a little bit. So let's imagine that we have, this is our normal blood glucose. Okay, that line is my normal line. I don't want to go up there. I don't want to go down there. If I go up, I've got to bring it down. If I go down, I'm going to bring it back up. So there are different mechanisms for this to happen. Now let's quickly discuss what might increase your blood glucose. Okay, so what might make this, what might make your, let me just choose a different color here. What might make this increase? Let's go for eating. So eating is going to cause your blood glucose levels to go above the normal line. It increases. And so there are some responses that the body will do to try and bring it back down to there. And you have to know the following key terms and the following processes. So we've got the pancreas. The pancreas is our absolute powerhouse. It releases a hormone, and that hormone is called insulin. Insulin. Now, insulin does two main jobs. The first job is that it causes your cells to be unlocked. So it allows glucose into cells, and that's for respiration. I mean, the fact is we eat food to get energy. Well, respiration releases energy in the mitochondria of our cells. So the insulin unlocks the cells for glucose to go in to do respiration in the mitochondria. There's another main job of insulin, and it is that it instructs the liver to make glycogen. Now, there's about 0.5 kilogram of glycogen in your liver and your muscles, more so in your liver. But both of these things takes glucose out of the blood. So I want to specify that. The whole purpose of this is to get glucose out of the blood. We do that by shoving it in our cells for respiration, or any leftover glucose we convert into glycogen. The way I like to imagine it is if glucose is individual molecules like this, then glycogen is a long chain like this. Synonymous with starch in plants, it is a long chain of glucose molecules. It's a bit more complicated than that, but at this level, we're not worried about the complications or the types of glucose. We're just saying glycogen is a big molecule stored in the liver. Now, both of these things helps reduce our blood glucose down to normal levels. So that's what happens when we increase. If the blood glucose increases, we want to bring it down, negative feedback. If this goes up, this brings it down. What about the other way? What happens if our blood glucose decreases? Okay, let's do this in blue. And that could be caused by things like fasting, not eating for a while. But the main thing that we quote in an exam would be exercise. So exercise is going to decrease the blood glucose in our body. And the body says, okay, the blood glucose has gone down. I want to bring it up. I've got to do the negative with the opposite. What is the mechanism for that to happen? Well, there's a bit of a mirror image going on here. We've got the pancreas. Again, the same powerhouse organ releases another hormone, but this one is called glucagon. And glucagon targets the liver and the muscles, but let's just go with the liver at the moment. So it does that, and it says to the liver, by the way, see all that glycogen you've got? Start to break it down. So the liver breaks down glycogen into glucose. Okay, so it's taking these, I'm doing this in blue now, taking these long chain glycogen molecules. I mean, these could be 60 odd sugars in length, and it breaks them down into individual glucose, and that gets released into the blood, which, as we know, will start to increase our blood glucose. So there is my way of describing the negative feedback system related to blood glucose. Okay, so the key things you have to know. You've got to know insulin, so there's know that word. Pancreas, know that word. Releases, they might want to say that releases it into the blood. Okay, releases into the blood. And you've got to know glycogen. You've got to know glucagon. Okay, and then this process here. So glycogen is broken down into glucose, which is released into the blood, increasing blood glucose. It's reckoned that will come up tomorrow. So hopefully, have a look at this. This is my way of describing it, and then we can have you can do some revision on that in your own time before tomorrow. Now, there's one last part of homeostasis I want to focus on, and it is one of the trickier ones. It's the menstrual cycle, and in particular, it is the hormones. Again, this is Nick from Cognito, so I need to give this full credit. There's a video to do with this. I recommend you watching it. I'm going to put it on the link in the description when I'm done with this. So, what does this mean then? Well, I want to. You might be presented with a graph like this. It's looking at the thickness of the uterus or the uterine lining, and this level here is supposed to represent the same thing over here. So this part over here after 28 days loops back and becomes day 0 of the next cycle. And so let's have a quick glance at the hormones, the interaction of hormones when it comes to the menstrual cycle. And let's begin with the two that are produced by the ovaries. Okay, so these are the estrogen and progesterone. The estrogen causes or targets the uterus to increase in lining. So whenever estrogen increases, so here, causes the uterus lining to increase. Then progesterone says, okay, to the uterus, keep the lining thick. So progesterone increases, which it does here, then the lining stays thick. If the uterus, sorry, if the embryo, I should just say, if the egg is fertilized into zygote and becoming an embryo, if that doesn't happen, and there's no embryo in the uterus lining, remember it had to sit in these folds in the uterus. If that signal isn't sent to say, by the way, there's an embryo in here, then progesterone decreases and the lining breaks down, and that's the bleeding. That's called menstruation. And then it happens all over again. After about day 4, estrogen increases, uterine lining increases, and so on and so on. But we have to know about 2 other hormones. It's a little bit complicated because we've also got to include 2 that are produced in the pituitary gland in the brain. And before we crack on with this one, let me just quickly go to my browser. I want to show you a diagram. So that's me. Hello. That's the browser. Let me just switch my computer to there. So you've got to know about the main glands in the body. Now, there is one up here called the master gland, the pituitary gland, which just sits just at the sort of top of the spine, just below the brain. It's called the master gland because it does a lot of controlling of it sends a lot of hormones out to other glands. Thyroid gland, thyroxine is used to regulate growth and metabolism, speeds up, slows down metabolism. The pancreas, again, we just discussed its role in blood glucose, produces insulin and also glucagon. The adrenal glands sit above the kidneys, and that produces the hormone adrenaline, which causes the body to get prepared for fight or flight, so that it will widen your blood vessels, ready to pump a lot of blood at high speed and pressure. It'll cause your heart to increase, it'll cause your breathing to increase. It's getting you ready for fight or flight. Now, obviously, we have the male and the female versions. The testes produce testosterone. The ovaries produce this estrogen, which we've seen in our chart here. So we're looking at the ovaries, we're looking at menstruation, or menstrual cycle, looking at the ovaries, and we're looking at the pituitary gland. Those are the 2 at play here. Let's go back to my visualizer. So let's have now this is quite a complicated graph, but we have to know that these 2 are made. Let me just choose my right color pen. So these are in the ovaries, which is fine. These 2 are produced in the pituitary gland. It's rather an unfortunate little diagram. I'm sure they use that diagram for something else, but it sits just below the brain at the top of the spine, and that secretes these hormones, among other hormones, but these are the ones involved in menstrual cycle. So how does it all work? Well, I'm going to explain it really quickly, then I'll try and show you a little sort of diagram to try and to sort of show it diagrammatically. I'm afraid you have to just revise it. In fact, so let me actually switch to this one. It might be easier for explaining it using this as well. So make do both at the same time. So day 0, there's bleeding, there's menstruation, and then the pituitary gland, which sits just below the brain, remember, secretes into the blood FSH. And FSH is called follicle stimulating hormone. It causes an egg, or remember, the eggs in the ovaries are actually immature. Okay, they are not ready to be fertilized. So this causes an egg or an ovum to mature. Okay, so that's the job of. That's a really unfortunate arrow. Never mind. It causes an egg to mature. in the ovary. The luteinizing hormone, so we'll come on to that in a second. So what happens is the FSH targets the ovaries. It says, okay, ovaries, start to mature some eggs, follicles. The eggs are sitting in a follicle, it causes them to mature. At the same time as doing that in the ovaries, causing an egg to mature, it will also stimulate the release of estrogen. Estrogen serves two purposes. Okay, one purpose is to do this. It causes the uterus lining to thicken. Okay, that's the purpose of estrogen. It causes uterus lining to thicken. But it also, it also causes, it says to the pituitary gland, which picks up the signals, that, okay, stop making FSH. So it inhibits the release of FSH. It stops the eggs maturing. That's important. You want to mature a couple of eggs, one or two, but then you want to stop doing that. You want to turn off that mechanism. So estrogen turns off FSH, but then it also causes the pituitary gland to release LH. LH is called luteinizing hormone. In other words, an egg is released. And that happens here. Stage 3 is called ovulation. So the increase in LH causes ovulation. An egg is released. Little tiny eggs released from a mature follicle. And that will cause estrogen to decrease now. So that decreases estrogen. But also, the release of an egg will cause progesterone to be released. Now, progesterone is secreted from what's called the corpus luteum, or the yellow body, which is essentially the bit that was swelling up inside the ovaries that the eggs released from. It forms into a thing called a corpus luteum, or a yellow body, which releases the hormone progesterone. I know it's complicated. And progesterone then says to LH, switch off. It instructs or it informs the pituitary gland to stop producing LH and also stop producing FSH. It turns off these two hormones. Okay, so what's left in the body after about day 20 odd should be high levels of progesterone, which maintains the uterus lining. Okay, so it maintains lining. You've got to revise this because it is tricky. I know it is. There's a lot of phrases and a lot of interplay between them. But that's how it works. I'm afraid you've got to revise that. Okay. If the body detects an embryo being embedded in the uterus, then I want to imagine this blue line remains high. Okay, for the next 40 odd weeks, 36 to 40 weeks. So if that is high, then the lining remains high and all these other hormones are switched off. That's important. You don't want to stimulate any more eggs to be released. The body is preparing for pregnancy. There's an embryo developing in the uterus. Everything else is switched off. Okay, so that is what happens naturally in a menstrual cycle. There's two options. You either maintain high and you have a baby, or it decreases, and bleeding happens, and you start all over again. So I'll leave this up there, and then I'll move, so you can pause it at some point if you want to look at it again, and then I'll leave this up here as well. But I strongly recommend you look at the Cognito video that I've nicked these screen grabs from, because they're pretty good. Okay, these are my favorite videos to watch. I strongly recommend that you do that. Someone's asking, it is tricky. I've seen the question. Well, yeah, the question before can be tricky. Let me give you some help though, because it's not all too complicated. It might ask about the menstrual cycle in a couple of different ways. And one is in contraception. Another one is in fertility. issues. We'll spend a minute just doing this really quickly. Contraception, we're looking at the oral pill, which is hormonal, and it will release, the pill releases 2 hormones. It could be 1 or 2 hormones. There is the progesterone, and it could be also estrogen. It's definitely progesterone or estrogen. Now, why would you take a pill which increases the progesterone levels in the body? Yeah, Fred, I can link the videos. Yeah, it is complicated. Now, why would you want to take a pill which releases this? And also, it's not just a pill. It could be a device which sits in the uterus. It could be a device that sits in the arm that releases hormones, progesterone, and in some cases, estrogen. Well, if you look at this, we want to stop this happening. So if we are artificially causing the body to have these high levels of progesterone, then these are both switched off. So the body will not be causing an egg to mature, let alone causing an egg to be released. So the contraceptive pill, the oral pill, is to do with high levels of progesterone so that these are not being secreted, so the egg isn't matured and the egg isn't released. So that's the purpose of the contraceptive pill, amongst other hormonal contraceptive methods. There are also other methods, the barrier method, which would be a condom, and there's also abstinence. Okay, so there are ways to prevent the sperm getting to the egg. In these cases, it's all about not releasing an egg in the first place. So tricking the body into not producing FSH and LH. Fertility, though, we want to release an egg. So what happened is, in extreme cases, you've got things like IVF, where the woman will have her eggs extracted, but they have to be mature. So before you can extract the eggs in the uterus, you have to cause an egg to be matured, which is your FSH, and then you want to have the egg released, and then you can get those eggs. So fertility issues, you might want to artificially increase these hormones to cause the egg to be matured and then released, and then the egg is extracted, and then the idea is that we have a little petri dish, and then in the petri dish you've got an egg, you've got a sperm, and then you cause these two to be fused together, and that's fertilization. And then the embryos, so they're monitored in glass. By the way, this stands for in vitro fertilization. In vitro stands for glass, or means glass. In glass fertilization. And say you have 2 or 3 viable embryos, then they are inserted back into the woman's body, hopefully in the lining of this. So what do you need for this? You need progesterone. So as well as doing this in the glass, you're also giving the woman FSH and LH to cause the eggs to be matured and released, and you can get those eggs. But then you want to give her progesterone so that her body is receptive to these embryos being placed back inside. So there's 2 ways in which the hormones of the menstrual cycle are controlled or tricked or manipulated. But again, okay, so what's the difference between there's a question coming up, guys. It's a good question. Difference between a physical barrier and chemical barrier. A chemical barrier would be things that kill the sperm. So a chemical called spermicide, it could be a sponge soaked in spermicide might be placed inside the woman's body. So any sperm that did get in are killed. So that could be, that's a chemical barrier. The only prevention of sexually transmitted disease is the physical barrier. Hormones and chemical barriers do not prevent STDs. So that's a good question, Fred. Thank you for asking it. The chemical barrier is a chemical which kills the sperm. It stops them getting to the egg. Okay, let's take a little side step now, and let me switch to my browser, which is there. And I want to show you this. Spend a couple minutes looking at my dog. So I'm just checking that my microphone is still working, and I'm showing this on the PowerPoint. Yes, I am good. So I want to show you, let's have a little drink here. Okay, so we've got a bit of time left. I want to just quickly go over some genetics. It's my dog, Spike, and Spike is the product of a father and a mother. Now, I used to call the dad Thor. We didn't know the dad's name. I called him Thor, but his name is actually Quincy. So it's not quite the gravitas of Thor, but he's a tiny little dog. And we're looking at genetics, and Spike was one of 3 in a litter, and we can see that they have very similar genetic traits. Okay, they're similar size, similar appearance, but they have differences as well. They have different fur color. Spike, which is my little dog, let's see, he's got a little white bib. There's a little white bib, whereas his 2 sisters do not. And so he's got little white boots as well. So Spike has distinctive features that are unique to him, but equally has similar genetic properties which are common to him and his siblings. And we're looking at, there's me, and we're looking at chances of genetic traits being seen. So let's just skip to this, skip to that. Okay, we don't need to know that just now. Let's just focus on, let's just get by here, chance. Okay. The chance of certain genetic traits being seen. So the idea of percentages. So percentages can also determine the probability of something happening. We'll come on to that shortly. We're looking at chromosomes. And just know that, again, this may come up tomorrow, know that in a cell you have a nucleus. The nucleus contains chromosomes, and those chromosomes are tightly wound strands of a molecule called DNA. And there are 23 pairs in the human body. So every cell in your body that has a nucleus will have 23 copies of the same, or it should be the same, 23 pairs of the same genetic code. There might be some mutations in there. Again, that's another detail for another day. And you get 22 chromosomes from the egg, 22 from the sperm, and then the last 2, you've either got an X or a Y, or an X and an X. An X and an X makes the offspring female. X and Y will make the offspring male. But remember, there's 23 chromosomes from the sperm, 23 from the egg, and those are called haploid. Okay, and they make a full complement of 46 chromosomes, 23 pairs. And a gene is a small sequence of DNA, so it could be anywhere up to hundreds or thousands of what's called base pairs, and it is a genetic instruction. And it instructs the body to make a protein that does something or is physically seen in the body. If we look here, there's 3 babies, and if you look at this chromosome, this could be chromosome number 1. There are 2 copies. There's a copy from the father and a copy from the mother, one from the egg, one from the sperm. Now, baby 1 has look at what's called the alleles. Now, alleles are copies of a gene. If we look at baby 1 has obviously the chromosome from the father and from the mother, and from the egg has the gene for blue eyes. The same gene for eye color from the sperm is the gene for brown eyes. So baby 1 would have brown eyes, and we'll discuss the words in a second. Baby 2, both of the mother's chromosome contains the brown-eyed allele, and then the one from the father, the sperm, has brown-eyed allele as well. So the genes are both brown eyes, the baby has brown eyes. And likewise for the blue eyes from the mother and the father, with the both blue eye genes, then the baby will have blue eyes. So you get 2 copies of every gene for hair color, eye color, and all sorts of complicated genes in the body, and that's called your genotype. So your genotype is the combination of 2 alleles for a particular gene. The phenotype is the physical appearance. So the way I think about it is phenotype begins with a PH, So there's physical. So phenotype is physical, genotype is the genes. So let's switch back to the visualizer and let's have a chat about how we might be asked this, because again, ChatGPT says this might come up tomorrow. Let's get some paper handy. Okay, so it's recommended that we know about Punnett squares. Okay, so let's do. Okay, let's think the following situation. Let's have the mum. Let's have the dad, and the mum has the phenotype. So that's her physical appearance. So let's just put down phenotype. So the mum has brown eyes. Okay. The phenotype for the father is also brown eyes. Okay, so far so good. Both parents have brown eyes. The genotype for the mum is big B, small b. Remember, the genotype, there has to be 2 copies of the genes. She physically has brown eyes, but her genes say big B, small b, brown and blue. And we call this dominant, we call this recessive. Okay, the small letter is usually the recessive version of the dominant gene. Brown eyes is dominant, blue eyes is recessive. The dad also has brown eyes, and his genotype is big B, small b. He's got brown eyes, but he is the carrier, so he carries the recessive gene. Okay, now let's think about mitosis and meiosis. Again, I recommend looking that up. Is the genotype influenced by the phenotype? It's the other way around, Freddie. The genotype is determined by the genotype. So the phenotype is determined by the genotype. Your genes determine what you look like. Okay, so if the mum has genotype brown-blue, then her physical appearance is brown eyes. Same for the father. Okay, so just like the baby I showed you, the chromosomes, 2 recessives, the same, it's called homozygous recessive, and you'll see the physical characteristics of the recessive gene. If both are dominant, you'll see the dominant gene. If you have one dominant and one recessive, the dominant always wins. Okay, good question. But the genotype determines the phenotype. I've done it this way because I want to explain how the baby looks, how the baby could look. So, what are the possible eggs that the mum could make? Well, we have to know about mitosis and meiosis. Now, I want to take a little pause here because I want to encourage you to look up this in your own. He says trying to find his, there's my book there. So I want to just quickly go to the section in my book because it can be complicated. I want to encourage you to look this up on your own. We're looking at, let me find it. Here, there we go. So I want you to look at this. This is mitosis. You have a body cell, the chromosomes copy themselves, then they line up, and then they're pulled apart to each side, and then a new nucleus is formed, and you have 2 identical copies of the daughter cells. So the parent cell produces 2 identical daughter cells. But meiosis means that this will happen, not a body cell, but this happens in the testes, the ovaries. This is going to be 6 cells, so the gametes, and another separation. So we take one of these, it then lines up again and further divides into half the, move this up, it further divides into half of the chromosomes needed. So meiosis is a further division of these 2 cells into 2 each. So imagine this becomes this, so you have 4 of them. And over the page, we've got a nice representation here. So if this was the original cell, then you have 4 different copies or 4 different gametes, 4 different sex cells, sperm or egg cells. So the one cell that begins with, we have 4 non-identical gametes. Whereas for mitosis, you have 2 daughter cells which are identical. Again, I recommend looking it up. Some revision on mitosis and meiosis. We don't have the time this evening, but that's something I want you to look at. So back to this then. If these are the genotype for the mum, what are her possible eggs? Her eggs could be big B or small b. Even though she herself has brown eyes, the egg that she makes could be big B. Remember, it could be one of these, because her genotype is split up and you have one or the other. The sperm for the father could be a sperm that contains a gene for brown eyes, or a sperm that contains a gene for blue eyes. Now let's look at all the possible combinations for the mother's eggs and the father's sperm. And so we produce what's called a Punnett square. So little grids of 4, and we put the eggs along the top and the sperm down the side. Okay, so this is going to be the eggs. This is going to be the sperm. It doesn't have to be that way around. I've just chosen that way around. But then we look at the 4 possible combinations. Now, it's not 4 babies, it's 4 possible combinations. And so if this egg and this sperm were to be involved in fertilization, then the offspring's genotype would be this, big B, big B. If this egg here and this sperm here were to fuse together in fertilization, this would be the genotype for the offspring. If this egg and this sperm, it would be this. And if it was this egg and this egg, it would be this. And the question could be, what's the chance of the baby having blue eyes? And so you look at all the possible combinations of the genotype that these parents could produce, and you say, okay, there's only one of those which could produce blue eyes. So that's 1 out of every 4 is going to have the genotype, big small b, which means there's a 25% chance of having blue eyes. Okay, so the genotype determines the phenotype. And the genotype is a product of the combinations, the 4 possible combinations of sperm and eggs. Now, we could do a few examples. We don't have the time to do a few examples. I want to show you an example where genetics could produce problems. And so let's have a look at a disease called cystic fibrosis. Sadly, I know people whose children suffer from this. It's a lung condition, which in the past has been quite debilitating, almost shortening lifespan. Now there's medication which can help alleviate the symptoms and almost cause a sort of fully functional life, but it's a genetic disorder. And it's caused by a recessive gene. Now remember, the genotype is the combination of 2 genes. The phenotype is the physical characteristics of the child. If both the genes are recessive for cystic fibrosis, then the physical would be the child will have the disease. So we've got 2 healthy parents. How can 2 healthy parents have a child that has a genetic disorder? Well, the mum will have the genotype big C, small c. She's healthy, but she carries the gene for cystic fibrosis. The dad is also healthy. He too carries a gene for cystic fibrosis. And so if we do the Punnett square, for the father and the mother. Here's the eggs, here's the sperm. Then we can see here that there is, a bit like the blue eyes, there's a 25% chance that the genotype for the baby will be small c, which means a 25% chance that the phenotype will have cystic fibrosis. Now, the parents could have 5 children, and the chances are that that could be one child, that could be another child, that could be another child, another child. The last child might be that one. So you could have 5 or 4 healthy siblings and one child that has this combination of, because the parents have the carrier. What if the mum was this, healthy, and what if the dad was also healthy but had that as his genotype? Well, even though the mum is a carrier for cystic fibrosis, because the dad has 2 dominant genes for healthy lungs or not cystic fibrosis, then that means that all 4 combinations of the offspring will have at least one dominant gene, and so none of the children will have cystic fibrosis. So we can eradicate genetic disorders from society just by having children, having a mixture of the population, and this is how genetic disorders can diminish. Okay, if enough people have this, and they have children with other people that have the carrier, but the children aren't going to have this genetic disorder, then that can help, it can alleviate. But this child could be this one here, even though that's the dad. The child could be this one, so they could go on to have a family of their own, but they have the carrier gene. They could also pass on. So that's something, again, ChatGPT said that might come up. I think what I want to do is I want to finish on evolution and classification, and then leave you to do ecology on your own. So let's start there then. So we're taking this idea of genetic characteristics and expanding it. And my dog Spike has literally just come in the room, and I'm going to go and close the door, so I'll be with you in 10 seconds. In fact, just since he's come in the room, let me just share with you. This is the infamous Spike, who is a nightmare. You see his little white beard, he's my finger, and that's his white bib and his white boots. So he's coming in to check him all right. He's checking I'm okay. So there's the infamous Spike. He's a little bit bigger than he was in that picture. Right. Let's chuck him on the floor. Let's do the last bit. Okay, let's do evolution, classification, and all the stuff that, again, recommended to look at and might come up. So we've got classification. Let's do this first of all. We'll do a little bit more, and then we will stop because it's 8 and you have your revision to do. Now, we've got the following. King Philip came over for great spaghetti. Now, I haven't lost it. Spike is losing the background here. King Philip came over for great spaghetti. Stands for kingdom. Spike disagrees with it. Phylum, class, order, family, and then important to, genus and species. Now these two here, that forms what's called the binomial nomenclature. So every organism in the world will have a 2-name system, a two-name description. For example, you could have things like Panthera. The Panthera is a group of cats which are roaring cats. So roaring cats, and you could have in there Panthera tigris, Panthera leo, and there's also the jaguar. There's 5 big cats. I can't remember the other ones. So animals within a species can mate and produce fertile offspring. Animals that are in the same genus could mate, but the offspring is infertile. So a tiger and a lion could mate. So you have a tigon or a liger, but the offspring normally, most cases, is infertile. But we have to know these are the 7 sort of breakdown of the 7 classification levels. Now the kingdom's an interesting one. So we've got animal, we've got plant, we've got fungi, we've got protists, and then we've got prokaryotic. Now, I want to create a bit of space there because I want to just do that again. So these kingdoms, so for example, we would be an animal kingdom, and then as you go down this list here, it has different descriptive properties based on appearance. So it could be mammals, and then it could be with a backbone, then it could be mammals, and as you go further down, it branches off into humans or roaring cats or dogs like Spike. So as you go down this list here, you separate out this organism tree. So we belong to the same kingdom as dogs and lions. We've also got a backbone. We've also got we're mammals, but then it starts to break off into more descriptive characteristics, and then you come down to these levels. Fred, the question there, what defines an animal as infertile? Okay, good question. So a tiger and a lion can produce an infertile offspring. Is basically it's a tigon or a liger, but they cannot produce offspring themselves. So the chromosomes that they have in their genotype, they cannot make sperm or eggs which can produce offspring. There are instances where that may have happened, but the general rule is animals in the same genus can produce an offspring, but it's infertile. You can't produce the same again. Okay, so that's what infertile means. The offspring cannot have further babies of that species. Let me just do this again really quickly because I want to discuss another thing. Oh, by the way, this was a word that might come up you need to recognize is a Swedish scientist called Linnaeus. I think I've spelled that right. If not, check it. So Carl Linnaeus, the Linnaean system for classification. So let's look at the kingdoms. So we've got animal, we've got plant, we've got fungus, we've got protists, single cell organisms, and then we have prokaryotes. That's things like bacteria. And then another scientist called Carl Voss, I can't remember, I think it's W-O-E-S-E, Voss. He said, actually, we need to refine this because we need to think about not just kingdoms. So remember, these are the original kingdoms. He said, no, there's another level up called domains. And they said, well, it's okay because these 4 here, these belong to the eukaryotic. Eukaryote means nucleus is true. So these are single cell or multiple cell organisms with a nucleus. Prokaryotes are no nucleus, and that's things that bacteria. So these are 2 of our domains. That's sometimes called the prokaryotes or bacteria. So there's another domain. But then, so we've got eukaryotes as one domain. got the prokaryotes as another domain. And then we've got a final domain called archaea. So these are our 3 domains. We belong to this one. Bacteria belongs to this one. And then these ones are what we tend to call extremophiles. So bacteria that exist are the ancient bacteria, or they exist in extreme temperatures, high pH, low pH, high temperature, low temperature. So these are our 3 domains. So there's an 8th layer above kingdom, where prokaryotes was part of the kingdoms. Now it's part of the domain on its own, as well as archaea. We belong to the eukaryotes domain. Our kingdom would be animal as part of that eukaryote. So that's something you have to know about. Linnaeus and Vos. Let's just put that down. I think that's his spelling. Check it up. Now let's have a think about evolution, and then we will be done. Okay, so let's have a chat about this, because I think it's important that we get a few facts correct for evolution. Again, this is recommended, it's going to come up, so I strongly recommend you have a think of this one. Just another way to approach it, and then we'll be done. So I want to imagine, now there's an animal, I can't remember the exact name of it, I've got it on my iPad here, let me just quickly find the name of it. Yeah, it's called a Heladotherium. Now, don't worry if you don't know what that is. I didn't until this morning. And what it is an early ancestor of the giraffe. So an early ancestor of the giraffe. Okay. Now the Heladotherium had a very short neck. How did it go from that, and how did the giraffe evolve? Okay, so let's just think about a few key things. Let's think about natural variation, okay, or natural selection. And it's also evolution. Evolution by natural selection was proposed by Charles Darwin. And he said, okay, let's take example of the Heladotherium, and let's have a look at the generation. So let's take the next generation from all the offspring. And he said that there is what's called natural variation. Okay, natural variation, which means that. Now this is going to be neck. Hang on. This is going to be numbers. This is going to be neck length. And he said, okay, the next generation is born, most of them are going to have normal neck lengths. Okay, the biggest number of offspring will have a normal neck length, like that. But he said, you've got to realize actually there are some up this end where the neck length is a little bit longer, so slightly longer. Slightly longer. But natural selection and variation says, okay, if you have some that are slightly longer, you've also got to have some which are slightly shorter. This is called natural variation, variation in a species. Now, why is it important? Well, as it turns out, the Heladotherium, the environment in which it lived, the ecosystem, the habitat, had much nicer foods higher up. And so if it had a longer neck, it might be able to reach higher up the tree and get the better food further up the tree. Now, so the question there, if the giraffe stretched its neck enough, the next generation would have a longer neck. That was the opinion of, who's the other guy? The guy from France. It was Charles Darwin, and then Lamarck. And Lamarck said, okay, if the giraffe wants it bad enough, then it will stretch its neck, and then its children will have a stretched neck. And that was proven to be, or not proven to be, that was shown to be wrong thinking. This is what is accepted as evolution. So what it means is all these giraffe ancestors were born. Most of them had normal neck length. Some had longer necks, some had shorter necks. Now, which one's the advantage? Okay, thank you for Lamarck in the chat there. I had a brain fog there. Is Lamarck. Now, this one has an advantage, and that's a key word that you've got to look up. You've got to mention. The slightly longer neck variation had an advantage in its environment over the variation with a shorter neck. So it had an adaptive advantage, an environmental advantage. And because this had an advantage over these ones, then these giraffe ancestors would live a bit longer, get the better foods, and there's a greater chance of having offspring and passing on the genes. Passing on the genes that has a longer neck. And then I want to imagine the next generation is born. So I'm going to just get rid of this for a second. This is an interesting thing to look at. This doesn't happen over the course of 1 or 2 generations. This happens over the course of millions of years. Okay, I'll leave it on here actually. The next generation that's going to be born could be. Let's look at this animal 10 generations down the line, and what you'll find is that this is now the new variation. The normal neck length has suddenly got a little bit longer. That's now the new normal neck length of this animal. And just because it's natural, there's a variation in the species. There are some that have longer necks and some that have shorter necks. And the ones that have longer necks has the advantage over the other ones, and it will get the food, it will live a bit longer, it will have offspring which can pass on its genes. And that's how, over the course of many, many generations, natural selection, because of variation, causes evolution. It's not Lamarck said where you have this wanting to stretch the neck. It's just there is natural variation in a species, and if that variation has an advantage, then it will live longer, or it could not be eaten as much, or it could get more food. It could hunt better, and then it will live longer and have a greater chance of passing on its genes. So that, my dog barks at someone else outside. So that is where evolution comes from. It's natural. Okay, now let's have a think about artificial. So as well as having natural selection, you could have artificial selection, artificial breeding. Okay, and that could be things like dog breeds where you choose, in fact I won't do another sheet for that one. That could be things like dog breeds where you are deliberately artificial. So you're deliberately choosing the parents for sorry, Spike has been quite responsive. He has evolved to have a bit of a guard dog mentality. He's just keeping an eye out for me with some threats outside. Cyclist a million miles away, looks of it. So back to this one. Artificial selection is when you are not allowing the natural advantage in an environment to have the babies or to produce offspring. You are deliberately choosing attributes which would not be an advantage and having offspring with those. Now we can see that in dog breeding, where, for example, the pug has been artificially bred over years to have certain features which would normally naturally not be continued in nature, but we have chosen those attributes for aesthetic purposes, for some of the competition. So it's an interesting one. So the artificial selection is when, hold on a second. Sorry about that. I was just putting Spike out of the room. We're almost done, folks. Trust me on that one. So I want to just explore this a little bit more. I want to give you one last thing to think about, and then you need to do some revision for B7 on your own. I'm not doing that one because it's quite a lengthy one. And I want to discuss bacteria and antibiotic-resistant bacteria. Okay, antibiotic-resistant bacteria. And I want to think about this. So let's go back to this for a second. There is natural variation in a generation. Well, generation happens over years for animal and mammals and plants. When it comes to bacteria, it happens every 30 minutes. And so you could have one bacteria leading to two, two leading to four, and then so on. You have 8. Within 2 days, you have several trillion. That's not an exaggerated number. You have several trillion bacteria cells. And let's have a think about generations of bacteria. Okay, so you could have, let's do it over here. So you get a generation of bacteria that are produced. So again, they double every 30 minutes. And you've got all these bacteria, like so, and they are all the same. And then they produce, it's called by binary fission, by the way. Binary fission. And they double themselves, so they have that there. But this one is different. This one has a mutation. And the mutation says it is resistant to antibiotics. Now, if you were to apply antibiotic chemicals to this colony of bacteria, then all of these might be killed. But then this one continues. And then it has this. And then it has this. So you've applied the drug to kill all these bacteria here, but this one's resistant, which means that its offspring or its daughter cells have the same genetic resistance as this one. And then you have this super strain. So this is evolution in action. This can happen. It does happen, and it's dangerous. The reason it happens is because people perhaps overprescribe antibiotics. There was a question a couple of years ago where it talked about how this can happen. It's to do with farming, where a lot of farmers give antibiotics without even knowing if the disease is present in their livestock. They give the cows and pigs and sheep antibiotics, and some of that is passed through the system and wasted, so it goes into the water system. So it's about oversubscribing antibiotic chemicals, pills or medication, and it's also about not finishing your full course of antibiotics. You can get rid of these naturally just with going. So say your prescription is for 14 days of antibiotics. If you stop after day 12, then you might think you're fine because you feel better, but some of these guys are still lingering about and your body's not getting rid of them properly, and they can continue to evolve. I mean, what could happen is down here, this could be even super strength, and you kill these ones off, but this becomes super strength. And that's where these sort of super strength bacteria can arise in certain conditions, because you are not fully using antibiotics to their full capabilities. You're not taking the full medication course. So that is evolution at a much quicker scale for antibiotics. I suggest you do a bit of reading on that as well. I've taken enough time out of your time, folks. I know it's a lot of information to take in. I strongly recommend that you look up B7, which is ecology as well. But I've given you the main points. I think may come up tomorrow, but please do your revision on top of that. Look up things like asexual and sexual reproduction. Look up fossils. Fossils, remember, there's 3 types of fossils. There is the actual remains of the organism itself. There is the sort of the mineral imprint, so where the fossil was is now minerals in the same shape. And there's also, the last one could be an imprint. So where the fossil was is no longer there, but you have kind of a almost like a footprint, a fossil print. So I think my dog's trying to get back in as well. So there is a lot still to cover, a few things. So one of the things that I mentioned you may want to revise is food security. So you have biodiversity, food security, the use of bacteria in food production. So there's a few things that you have to look up in your own time, guys. So I appreciate there's a lot to cover. I've done the main bits and tried to put my spin and my explanation on it. And that's what these are about anyway. Just my way of explaining it. It might help sink it into your brains. So after an hour and a half of me talking rubbish for biology, then good luck tomorrow, folks. If you're in Mayfield, then I will see you in the morning or the afternoon. Come and get some help if you're stuck. If you're at other schools, good luck in exams, folks, and have a wonderful Monday. See you later.